This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best place to easily build a website, portfolio, and online store, an all-in-one platform to give you the best design to showcase your work. In this video, I'm going to show you how to animate a water splash animation in any frame-by-frame software. The software that you use for this doesn't matter at all. As long as you can draw new frames in it and see the onion skins, use whatever you're most comfortable in. These are all good options. Now, I really like to animate in Photoshop, so that's what I'll be using with the plugin Animate 2, which you can download for free in the description. Animate 2 adds this toolbar that you'll see here, which just adds the basic frame-by-frame animation tools that you might need. So let's start by breaking down the elements of a splash. We've got an object which falls into the water. Here it's this ball, and as it hits the surface, it kind of slows down and falls away. And as it hits, it displaces a large amount of water, shooting it up from all sides, creating like a wall or a sheet. And they fly up over the course of a few frames and then slowly fall down back into the water, creating an arc motion. And as they reach the top of their arc, the wall kind of splits into different sort of beaded forms and little droplets appear. And then we have the water being displaced down here, shooting back up over a few frames, creating a secondary splash, which then comes and falls back down again. We also have these waves that appear at the surface, and they radiate out from the center and settle down. And all of this action happens in about 1.5 seconds. So there's a lot of elements to keep track of that all work together to make a believable animation. But we're only going to animate one at a time to keep it really manageable. Let's start a new file. I'm animating on a 24 frames per second timeline, and each drawing will be 2 frames long, or on 2s. And we're going to draw a rough animation just like our example, and then clean it up to use in our final scene. Let's start with a straight line for our surface, and I'm going to stretch that frame out for 36 frames, which is 1.5 seconds. And on a new layer, let's draw our ball. A single frame of it in the air, one more of it contacting the water, one of it just below the surface, traveling much less distance now because it has to push through the water to get down. And these ghost images that you can see are called onion skins, and they're pretty essential for knowing what the previous frames look like so you can plan your current frames correctly. And you should be able to turn these off pretty easily in any animation software. And I'm just going to keep adding frames of this ball moving further downward at about this speed. There we go. Now let's add a new layer for our splash and work in a new color. And on the frame where the ball hits and breaks through the water, I'm going to draw the area where the water displaces down here, and then kind of draw a random looking splash shape. And now it's important to make the shape asymmetrical because rarely in nature a splash is identical on both sides. You won't see a splash, looking too much like this. Something like this on the right is going to be far more appealing. Now what we want is for each part of the splash to follow an arc that kind of looks something like this, where we draw a few more frames at the top of the arc, and then less as it moves down. And you want these all going in every direction. It's not necessary to draw these guides, but it's important to know in your head the rough path that the drops are going to take. And ads are probably going to splash up even a bit further than that, maybe up around here. On the next frame, we're going to push that splash a bit further upwards and a bit more outwards as well. And we're going to want this water to curve in a bit more behind the ball as it rushes in to fill this air pocket here. And we're drawing this really roughly throughout this process because we're going to clean this up at the end later. On the next frame, we're going to go even higher. And some of these drops are even going to separate from the main form. And I'm going to draw a hole starting to appear in the sheet as well. And these holes are going to appear more as the sheet is more pulled apart as the surface tension isn't strong enough to hold it together anymore. In the next frame, we're going to continue that motion with more separation between the sheet, and some of these tendrils are going to start to bead into individual droplets. And a lot of these droplets are going to start slightly moving down as well because they've reached the top of their arc. And our water at the bottom here has almost completely filled this air pocket left by our ball. Even more separation on this next frame. Most of the drops are starting to make their way down now. On this next frame, almost all of our droplets are fully separated, and I'll continue to draw them on their path downwards. We've also got some of our first droplets hitting the water. And I'm going to give them a smaller splash shape as they're going to do essentially a much smaller and much simpler version of what we're drawing here over just a few frames. I'm going to continue that process on the next frame and then draw a couple of small blobs just bouncing out of these first splashes that have hit the water. It can also be tempting to draw all of the drops hitting the surface at the same time, but it's going to look a little more interesting and realistic to have some of them delayed and connecting over the next few frames, not all at once. Now the number of droplets you're going to have is going to be different depending on how detailed you want to go, because an actual splash this size would have hundreds, and we're stylizing this for animation because that would take far too long and it won't really make the result look much better. So our main splash is done, and I'm noticing that I probably added a few too many of these secondary splashes as the droplets hit in, but I can just choose to ignore some of those when it comes to cleanup. So now let's add a secondary splash on a new layer. First, a quick word from this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the easiest and most intuitive platform that I've ever used to build a website. It's important to have a website because clients will take you seriously and they'll be knocking down your door to hire you when your work looks this professionally presented. When it comes to a portfolio site, minimal I think is the way to go to let your work do the talking. Squarespace has a huge library of templates, and once you've uploaded your work, you can try on another template really easily and switch back without no extra work. They also have full e-commerce functionality, so you can start selling your own merch or digital products quickly, easily, and all in the one place. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Ben Marriott to save 10% off your first website or domain. So a secondary splash is caused by these pieces of water rushing in after this air pocket and sending in a big spurt of motion upwards. So immediately after that frame, we're going to draw a spurt coming upwards. And then on the frame after that, extend it upwards even more. And then on the next frame, we're going to have it start to fall apart and create beads like our original splash animation did. And then continue that process, drawing these drops further apart until they hit the water. Two of the main parts are splash done, but the last two details are really going to pull this all together. First, let's add some bubbles that get trapped as the water closes behind our ball. Done. And it's nice to have these bubbles sort of flowing in an S wave shape as they come up from the ball, following it like this. Now let's add some waves to the surface. They're going to appear on the first splashing frame and get a little bit larger on the next frame. And on each frame after that, they're going to move a little more away from the center and slowly settle down into the water as well until they're completely straight. And that secondary splash is going to create another wave as well. There, I'm happy with that. We've got the rough animation made for our four main components of the splash. From here, we can begin the tedious process of cleaning up the animation. We're going to create some new layers and draw over this rough pass with cleaner lines. And you can fill them in whatever style you like. The size, shape, and duration of your splash should also be determined by what object is hitting it and at what speed. A pebble falling into water might only create a few drops that fall over 6 frames, but a huge boulder is going to displace a lot of water and cause large waves that might take many seconds to disperse. If we have liquid dropping onto a hard surface, like rain onto the ground, it would look something like this. There's no water to displace, and the only splash is the drop breaking apart over only 8 frames. I'd highly recommend the book Elemental Magic by Joseph Gilland if you want to learn more about effects animations like liquid, fire, and smoke. I learned a lot of the techniques from that book. Here's what our splash looks like after final cleanup in Photoshop and some coloring in After Effects. Please take a deeper look into the project files that are free to download down in the description. I've made a short playlist of some related videos that I think you'll enjoy if you've made it this far. I'll see you in the next video, and please consider subscribing if you'd like more of these videos every week.